Hey there, and welcome to Ask Daniel number 17. Extremely excited having you here. I think this is going to be a really good episode. Dawn Tittle, subscribe to your channel. Just got a notification. Thanks, Dawn. Welcome so much to the channel. Now, the reason I think that is going to be a really good episode is that we have really good questions. I mean, every single question is good. I'm grateful for every question I get, but I feel like in this episode in particular, there's some really, kind of bread and butter, classic questions that we're going to review today. So I think it's going to bring a lot of value. So with that said, my standard disclaimer: nothing is medical advice here, just general thoughts and comments that applies to anyone with a similar problem to the one that is asking a question. So with that said, let's move right over here to a question from Alex. And this is Alex from Talking Insomnia number 16. That episode was about these, episodes when we're about to fall asleep and we're just suddenly aware that we are about to fall asleep. And most recently, I had Ellen Wernter as a guest on the show. Really good episode, I believe. That was Ask Daniel number 16. So, check that out. I think she had some great answers. But, there was a discussion there about how, these episodes when you're about to fall asleep and you suddenly become aware that they're common. And I said something to the fact that, or she said, I don't know who said that actually first, but if you try not to do anything about it, kind of just let it happen, don't react to it, you will fall asleep, or you may not, meaning you may not fall asleep. You may have a sudden awareness and then you may not fall asleep, which is probably rare, but that could happen. And the important thing there was like, that's okay. That's also okay. Eventually you'll fall asleep. But anyway, Alex has some follow-up questions, and he said the following. I would appreciate if you could answer these questions for me tonight. Number one, when you said, quote unquote, you may not fall asleep, end quote, even after not doing anything when the sudden awareness happens, did you mean not fall asleep for the entire night, question mark? Or did you mean you may not get past it immediately after the sudden awareness happens, but soon thereafter, as long as you're trying not to solve the sudden awareness when it happens? I want to say this, that if you have the sudden awareness and you're kind of like not reacting to it, then the most likely that will happen is that very soon after you will fall asleep. But what I think I really wanted to point out that I think is important is that if you're about to fall asleep and the sudden awareness happens, then you're like, I'm not going to react to it, not going to do anything, and then you don't fall asleep, and then you don't fall asleep, it takes a while, then there's nothing strange with that. You were probably not as sleepy as it seemed. You were about to fall asleep, but then you kind of were alerted, and then you're not falling back asleep, and that simply means that you actually didn't have that much sleep drive. That's nothing strange with that. Most likely, if you don't do anything, you don't react to the sudden awareness, you will either fall asleep right away, or maybe in a few minutes, or you could be up for hours. But that doesn't mean anything is wrong. It just means that you weren't actually that sleepy, which actually happens a lot when, for example, let's say it's kind of afternoon and I've been busy, with the kids. It's the weekend. I'm sitting down and I fall asleep, and then I kind of be aware I almost fell asleep that time. Let me stand up, and then I'm up for hours after that. That just means like I had that sudden awareness of falling asleep, but it wasn't actually time for me to sleep. I wasn't really ready for it. So I think the important point here is that these sudden awareness of falling asleep, very common, nothing abnormal about them, and if you have that sudden awareness and you kind of wake up and then you're up for like hours, that doesn't mean anything in particular. It just means that you weren't ready for sleep that time. So so I hope that answers your questions. I think in that episode, I meant what I talked about was when I said you may not fall asleep that time, I wanted to convey that it wouldn't surprise me if you're up for a few minutes or so. That's what I meant in that episode. But it could be longer too, but that doesn't mean anything really. Number two, maybe the more important of the two. Up until last Thursday, I thought and had great success with getting past the sudden awareness and transitioning into sleep by not doing anything about the sudden awareness when it happened. And apparently so did Ellen, which was so awesome to hear, her success as well. I never had any nights where not doing anything did not work. And over time, I didn't even have these sudden awarenesses anymore. But based on how I interpret your discussion with Ellen on Thursday, I'm scared that you think that not doing anything might work, because you have always said that not doing anything about the sudden awareness when it happens will work. And it has worked for me, just as you knew it would. Not to mention that Ellen also said that when she had one of these sudden awarenesses, she did nothing about it and then got past it and went to sleep. So my question is, do you think that not doing anything about the sudden awareness when it happens might get you past it? Or do you think that not doing anything about the sudden awareness when it happens does work, even if it takes a couple of tries? Again, I feel like you think that not doing anything about the sudden awareness when it happens does work when it happens. But from how I understood Thursday podcast, I'm just second guessing myself. Okay, I think I get the question here. I want to say that not doing anything when you have the sudden awareness is just kind of like not reacting to it, not creating hyperarousal that will then, keep you from falling asleep, and more importantly, will make you worried about this awareness, will kind of like signal to you that it's something to be worried about. Not doing anything cannot in itself make you fall asleep. It's not something that can work in the sense that will make you fall asleep, but it will keep you from having more of these events long term. So I would say that I feel like what's really important here is that the kind of sudden awareness of falling asleep is very, very common. And when we have no control over whether we will have them any particular night or any particular instance. We can't really, there's no way to keep ourselves from having the sudden awareness of falling asleep. But when you don't do anything about it, you kind of train yourself not to look at it as anything that you should avoid. You train yourself that it's normal and you shouldn't do anything about it. And I think over time you have less and less of them. And probably because you don't recognize them, you don't actually pay attention to them. So I think for the very instant that you can't control what's going to happen tonight, but if you don't do anything, you don't react to them, over time you will just not pay any attention to them. So I think that's important to know, that you can't do anything about tonight, but you can really do something about the long term. Get to a point where if it happens, you're like, okay, whatever, and then you fall asleep, or you don't. You really don't. It doesn't face you. There's no worry at all about them. So so that's kind of my answer to this question. Now, here's something important that I've been thinking about for a while, is that the discussion here about the sudden awarenesses, we can take it kind of to the meta level and learn from our other guest, Nick Wignall, who was in Ask Daniel number, I believe that was 15 or 16. And he taught me something that I think is really important, which he said, like, you have to be willing to experience anxiety. Otherwise, you will never get past that. You will train yourself that anxiety is bad, that you should avoid it. Same thing with insomnia. He said, like, you have to be willing to have insomnia. If you're not willing to have insomnia, you're training yourself that it's bad, and you will like have more of it, because you're gonna be more fearful of it. And now, in a specific example he had was like about anxiety, that you may feel anxious, and you take like a Xanax, you will feel less anxious for the time being. The problem is that by doing that, by taking that medication, you're training your brain to feel that, you shouldn't feel anxiety. You should do something about it. Anxiety is bad, etc. So it temporarily feels better, but over the long term, it hurts you. And now the meta aspect of this is, I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I get the sense that whenever I talk about this on awarenesses, you sometimes feel like reassured, okay, I got it right. But then you become a little bit worried about it. And then, you send me an email, and then you feel a little better. And so I love questions. I absolutely, it's the lifeblood of this channel. But I'm thinking that perhaps, Alex, when you look for kind of reassurance, I say something that may you be aligned with what you're thinking, you feel better for a while, but then you hear something else, and then you become kind of more, you can be worried again, and then you ask me a question, and then that you feel reassured, and it's possible that the kind of reassurance you get from me answering questions helps you, temporarily, but may not actually help you long term. So just kind of something to think about. But anyway, Alex, stay in touch. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions, and we shall go from there. Cool. So with that said, let's turn to this email that we got from Thomas, and this was actually 4 days. It came right after Ask Daniel number 16. So sorry I couldn't answer that time, but here it is. Hi Daniel, I received your contact information via your YouTube channel. I have some questions regarding my sleep pattern. I have the suspicion of sporadic fatal insomnia. I developed sleeping problems around the second half of August last year, where I couldn't sleep at all. Before this period, I had some sleep problems like waking up during the night. This has been going on till now, so like 5.5 months since August. Sleeping pills don't seem to work. I received some antidepressants, escitalopram, which helped for my anxiety, but not really for my sleep. During this time, I lost some weight rapidly, especially around my neck and legs. I developed something like muscle spasms, myoclonus, double vision, watery eyes, swallowing problems, although regular visit to the osteopath seems to help. Okay, I have some memory problems, but I don't think I have dementia at this point. I have a lot of problems with my joints around my knees and ankles, but I don't think I have ataxia. My muscle coordination is still okay at this point. My parents, however, note that I'm sleeping sometimes. At times they shout my name and apparently I don't react, hence they assume I'm sleeping. During the night, I often have the feeling that I'm dreaming, but apparently this is also possible with FFI. A few weeks ago, I used an app to record snoring sounds, and there are some brief moments where it recorded my snoring. My Fitbit also said that I'm sleeping. Because of all the neurological signs, though, I'm still rather concerned that I have SFI. I would appreciate your opinion on the matter. I'm 28 years old. So, Thomas, thanks so much for this question. It is a common one. It is a very common question, and I want to say the following: that of course, that this, fatal familial insomnia is this very rare condition which runs in family. It's autosomal dominant, and if nobody has it in your family, well, then there's no reason to believe that one has that. So what people are usually worried about is the sporadic form. And now that is extremely rare. I think there are some 30 cases ever in the entire world recorded. And what I read from it is, so actually before I say anything further, I feel they're kind of like there are various ways of approaching when you have a concern about this. One is to go down the route of like exploring what symptoms one has and finding like this makes it more likely, this makes it less likely. And we can do that. But that said, the problem with that is that no matter how much you explore your symptoms, you will never really, really, really be able to kind of like exclude the possibility that you have this, like just based on how you feel. So, and when you kind of examine your symptoms and determine and use that to determine whether you have this or not, you're kind of paying more attention to yourself. You're giving insomnia more attention. So I think, generally speaking, a better approach may be to kind of just choose something, like choose to believe that you have it or choose to believe that you don't. And like the path from there kind of becomes the same, because if you choose to believe that you just have regular insomnia, like, the type of insomnia that everybody has, then what should you do? Well, you should spend less time in bed, you should like be active, do things you enjoy, etc. If you choose to believe that you have this condition, then it kind of becomes the same. It's like, so there's no cure, there's no treatment for it. So what should you do? Well, you should just enjoy the time you have when you're healthy and you can think, and you can communicate with people and just enjoy life. So I think that is really the best approach. And actually, I'm going to throw one more in there, which is check out Insomnia Insight number 284, where Chad goes over how you can actually run like check your own genome and check if you have the mutation. And I feel like that may not be easy, but just knowing that there is a test, apparently pretty straightforward test, can be reassuring. So with that said, I'm going to go down this route, which I don't know if it's good to go down, but I want to say that my understanding of these conditions is that they're rapidly progressive and that it's obvious, meaning for the person who has one of these neurodegenerative disorders, it may not be obvious, but to other people it is. Like other people will notice that, okay, this is clearly wrong. So I feel for somebody where people around you don't notice anything being wrong, then that's kind of one sign that one doesn't have it. Anxiety, I feel like being worried about it is kind of a reassuring thing, because these neurodegenerative conditions, it's not like insomnia has ever been described. Actually, it's more like the loss of sleep, kind of the objective sleeping less, but not the insomnia, not the like I'm struggling to sleep, I can't fall asleep, I'm worried about my sleep. Okay. And then age-wise, that it happens to older people, and the fact that people actually seem to observe you sleep, well, that's kind of like very, very, very reassuring. The fact that a Fitbit says that you're sleeping, that's very, very, very reassuring in my opinion. So, so with that said, Thomas, I hope this was helpful to you, and just stay in touch and let us know how things go. Cool. So Thomas, we answered that question. Okay, Miles. This is an email that came in 3 days ago from Miles. So let's read this. Hi, Daniel. I've struggled with insomnia for about 5 years. The first 3 years, however, I did not even notice I slept bad. I just always felt off and tired. I've always woken up early, and this became earlier and earlier, and 2 years ago, started getting more fragmented sleep too. It feels like my body just aims for a fragmented total of 5.5 to 6 hours a night, and then doesn't let me sleep for an extra significant time. However, most of the nights I do not feel actively stressed or aroused. My body simply just won't sleep, even though I'm pretty relaxed often. Needless to say, this is making me chronically tired and affecting my energy levels. My question for you is it possible to have insomnia without the hyperarousal part? How can I work on making my sleep less fragmented and hopefully improve my sleep quality and duration? So, Miles, thanks so much for this question. I want to say there's a couple of things that I'm thinking of when I read this. So, firstly, I've struggled with insomnia for about 5 years. The first 3 years, however, I did not even notice I slept bad. I just always felt often tired. That's, this scenario is pretty common, that someone doesn't necessarily feel like, it takes a long time to fall asleep, or I'm struggling with sleep. It just feels like sleep is unrefreshing. I feel tired. I slept a decent amount of time, but I just don't feel any better. And if for someone out there that's in that, it recognizes that scenario, I feel like if there isn't anything obvious going on with sleep, like somebody snoring a lot, trouble breathing during sleep, or, insomnia type symptoms or anything, if there's nothing obvious going on with sleep, then sleep is probably not the culprit. That's my feeling. If I see somebody in clinic and there's nothing obvious going on with their sleep, they just say like, I don't feel refreshed, it must be something wrong with sleep. I'm like, I don't think so. I think it maybe it's something else. It could be something else medical, of course, or it could be, I feel like the most common thing is that people are not refreshed because of maybe they're not active enough, maybe not physically active enough, maybe not kind of mentally like stimulated enough. Maybe there's not something exciting going on, like exciting that makes you like want to get out of bed and do something during the day. So that's kind of just a little thought on those first lines, meaning maybe there was something with sleep going on, or maybe not. You just felt often tired. Now, it seems like waking up became earlier and earlier, and sleep started getting more fragmented. Now we have some insomnia symptoms, fragmented sleep, waking up early, body just aims for 5.5 to 6 hours. And so the question, so now we hear some insomnia type symptoms. And the question from Miles is that, could I have insomnia without being like hyper aroused? I would say that insomnia without hyperarousal is possible, and in that scenario, it's kind of like what I like to call like it's a gas only problem, meaning, you know, you're just, if somebody's just not sleepy enough, even without being worried, they're just not sleepy enough, they can have insomnia type symptoms. And that classically is, in fact, I just had a patient that came back to see me this week, who I saw like 2 weeks ago or something like that. And I think his story was something to the effect of like, not much trouble falling asleep, but woke up after 3 hours and then was up for like 2 hours and then slept another 5 or 6 hours, something like that. And I felt like, and there wasn't much anxiety about it, no hyperarousal, no like worrying about it. So I said, I think this is pretty straightforward. I think if you just go to bed 2 hours later, you will have more solid sleep. And came back, and that was the case. That was like a simple case of like not enough sleep drive, not enough sleepiness. So that can happen. Somebody can have trouble sleeping simply because they're not sleepy enough when they go to bed without any hyperarousal. That can certainly happen. And if that is the case, well, that's a pretty easy fix. That's kind of the good news here. If someone like yourself, Miles, like you're not feeling hyperaroused, not anxious, not worried at all, then it's probably a pretty easy fix. It just is a matter of like you're spending less time in bed, going to bed later, but still getting up at the same time every morning. And what can happen is, you're mentioning that you're only sleeping like 5.5, 6 hours. If I don't know how much time you're spending in bed, but let's, for argument's sake, say that you're spending 9 hours in bed. Let's say you're going to bed at 10 and you're getting up at 7, and you're sleeping like, let's say that you're sleeping more than you think, just for argument's sake. Let's say you're sleeping 7 hours, but you're spending 9 hours in bed. Then there's 2 hours where you're kind of in and out of sleep, superficial sleep, tossing and turning, etc. Then it feels like you sleep less. So I think if that something like that is the scenario, then I think, generally speaking, again, not medical advice as always, but generally speaking, the best thing I think is to do is to spend less time in bed, to align how much one thinks one sleep with how much one spends in bed is really good. So if one says, I think I sleep 6 hours per night, then maybe start there, spend about 6 hours in bed. And what can happen then is that the sleep you get can become like really good quality. It can be like you go to bed, fall asleep quickly, get into deep sleep, sleep for 6 solid hours, get up, feel refreshed, feel more refreshed by spending less time in bed. It sounds like counterintuitive. That can definitely happen. So I think that is like the trick for somebody who's like has no anxiety. It's just spend less time in bed. By the way, the approach is actually the same if you have anxiety or hyperarousal too. It's always kind of the same thing with sleep, like spending less time in bed is the trick. But I hope that answers the question of, can you have insomnia without the hyperarousal part? Yes, you can. If that's the case, it's just a gas problem, a sleep drive problem. And now just to kind of add a little extra thought on this is that I want to say hyperarousal can range from like a panic attack that's like all out, full on hyperarousal, to super subtle hyperarousal, the one where we don't even feel it, but it's kind of there in the back of our minds. We're a little bit on edge, but we don't feel it. And when you read something like, somebody who's kind of like a little bit questioning why it is they are fighting to sleep, they're kind of questioning why they don't sleep more, etc., then that could be a sign of like a little bit of preoccupation and hyperarousal. And then yeah, I think I'm gonna end there. I think that was all for now. So Miles, super appreciate this question. If you have follow-up questions, please stay in touch. Let us know how things go for you. And then we have, I think we have a question here from Megan. And this is, let's say, let me just make sure I got it right. Here it is. This is from 2 days ago. So I think for a little backdrop here, Megan is taking some type of sleep medication, kind of wants to come off it, decided to come off it, not take it during the weeks, but take it on the weekends or something like that. So let's read this. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for your video response. That was in a previous episode. I've been sleeping well now on weekends without any sleep medication. So I decided to try to sleep without taking a pill last Thursday, but I failed miserably. Maybe it was too soon. Oh well, I won't lose hope. I was wondering if you had a chance to read the article I sent previously relating to lack of sleep negatively impacting T cells. And if so, what are your thoughts? Um, let's stop there for a second and talk about this study, and about also let's comment a little bit on this attempt to come off the sleep medication. So let's actually start with that one. When I've seen this a lot in clinic, that when and I've made this mistake like a couple of times. I've had a patient that was that was on a sleep medication, and but didn't seem too they still had decent sleep confidence. They didn't seem desperate to take their medication, and where I said, you know what, you don't seem desperate, your sleep confidence is pretty good, you can kind of take your time getting off of it, and leaving patients to kind of like self-taper. And I realized that does not work. That's very hard to do. I should put it that way. That's very hard to do, because what happens is when you leave it to when you leave it to patients, from my perspective or from kind of your own perspective, if you kind of try yourself, then you're always like, you're self-monitoring, you're kind of questioning, you try, and whenever somebody says like, I'm going to try to come off this medication, it automatically makes me think this person is going to go like, okay, this is the night, this is my trial, I'm going to bed, I'm not taking a medication. And I feel that invariably leads to going to bed being like, okay, let's see what's going to happen. How do I feel? Do I feel sleepy? Not yet, but I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Still not sleepy. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. What if I take, maybe I should just take half. Maybe I should just wait till tomorrow. Maybe I'll wait a little bit longer. What if I can't come off? And that's the reason why it's so hard to come off medications, because that self-monitoring and the trying in itself produces so much insomnia. So how should one do that? Well, I think it's very difficult to come off medications if one leaves oneself the option of going back, because you always have that in your mind, like, should I go back on it? What if, etc. So just, something to keep in mind. I feel like for somebody that really, really wants to come off medication, it kind of has to be like a decision, and then no questioning it. Like, I'm going to stop on this date, and then I'm never going to take it ever in my whole life again. I think that is one way to do it. It's obviously very challenging, and etc. And sometimes you have to ask, also question like, do I have to come off of it now, or should, now I'm going in a different direction. I probably shouldn't go on, but I want to say that whenever one tries to come off medications, the trying itself can be really the reason why one has rebound insomnia. And the second thing was that celebration is always in hand when good things happen. I've been sleeping well on weekends without any sleep medication. That is awesome. And that's kind of like that evidence that, you can sleep without medications, So just sharing a little bit of thoughts there. Now, going to that study on T cells. So I looked at this study, and I want to say that it was kind of like classic, like in a sense that it's the type of question we as a community here, or I as the host of this channel, often get. Meaning, if when I started looking at the study, it was like, oh my gosh, it's actually the reason why people like myself on kind of the front lines, like taking care of people with insomnia, sometimes are frustrated with academia, because they're not helping, at all. It's like just confusing people. So the study I looked at that Megan shared with us was basically, it's like super technical. Like, it's all about like, we use this essay, this writing essay, then we use this test, then we calculate this, then we do this and this and that. And like reading, it's like, what did you do? What are you doing? And then finally, when you come to like, finally when you come to like the method section, you see that they've done the following. They took 10 people, yes, 10 people, this many people. So it's a very small study. And then they had 2 conditions. So in one condition, these 10 people were allowed to sleep as much as they wanted in a sleep lab, like fully monitored, and then they drew some blood, and then they had them completely sleep deprived, like were up for the entire night, and then they drew some more blood, and then they examined like how sticky these T cells were. I mean, how and sticky is kind of a good thing that can adhere to like whatever bacteria they're fighting or something like that. And lo and behold, when people are completely sleep deprived one night, their T cells were less sticky. And like from that, they jump to, well, this could be why, you know, you have poor immune system when you're having insomnia. There's kind of like there's this kind of a crazy jump. It's a crazy jump from some like preliminary, very small experimental study to kind of like generalize it to like this entity that you're not even studying. Sleep deprivation is completely different from insomnia. Insomnia is when you're struggling to sleep, you're trying to sleep, you're wanting to sleep, but you can't fall asleep. And in this study, people were sleep deprived. They were like, you're not allowed to sleep. You know, you have to stay up, which is completely different. So I want to say that there's nothing whatsoever I think one should take away from that study. And a couple more things on that. You know, in the beginning, when I was kind of new to this channel, I just started, I was always wondering, like, why is it that these people who have trouble sleeping read these studies? Like, people ask me, like, you know, is it true that insomnia does that? I'm like, why are you reading studies? It's not helpful to you. And which then leads me to my realization that that behavior is part of what's called threat monitoring. You know, when you have trouble sleeping, it's like your brain has identified sleeplessness as a threat. And when you have like a real physical threat, like, you know, a grizzly bear, it makes total sense to read up on like, how does the grizzly bear attack? Like, what does the grizzly bear do at night? Like, how does the grizzly bear behave? Because that will keep you safe from a physical real threat, like a grizzly bear. But when the threat identified by your brain is a perceived threat, like insomnia, it doesn't help to do that kind of threat monitoring, like reading up on insomnia. It's not helpful. It just gives it more attention. It feeds the notion that there is a threat. Like the behavior of threat monitoring makes it feel like there is a threat. So that's a little bit on threat monitoring. And then my final point here is like, it can seem really important to find the truth about like, does insomnia really cause this or not? And the thing is that you cannot prove that insomnia causes any health problems. I don't believe it does. Like the literature, to my reading literature, is like very much supportive of like, you know, people with insomnia have the exactly same life expectancy as people without insomnia. But that said, if you would like to prove that insomnia causes problems with your immune system, guess what? You would have to take like, let's say 2,000 people, make 1,000 of them insomniacs, make 1,000 of them not be insomniacs, follow them over like many years and see like where did we get most infections, which is completely impossible because you cannot induce insomnia, because insomnia is like self-driven. It's like it comes from within. You can't make somebody an insomniac. So it's impossible to prove that insomnia has any negative health consequences, which then leads to the fact that truth is not to be found. There is no truth to be found. You cannot get to the bottom of it. So that's where it's kind of pointless to try to find the truth. And so I think it's much better to do one of two things. Either choose a belief that's helpful. In this case, the question is, does insomnia cause problems with your T cells? Well, I believe the belief that it does is not a helpful one if you have trouble sleeping. It's going to make you feel like it's really important that I get my sleep, and it's put more pressure and cause more insomnia. If you choose the belief that it doesn't affect my health at all, that's a helpful belief. So one strategy, which is the second best strategy, is to choose a belief that serves you well. And I think generally speaking, that is the belief that insomnia doesn't cause any negative health consequences. But an even better thing to do is to abandon the search. There's no truth to be found. Abandon the search and don't even go there. Don't do the threat monitoring. You know, I think that's the better strategy of the two. All right, Megan. Oh yeah, there's some more from Megan. Let's go back here into our email, and she said, also, I'm in the middle of The Sleep Book by Guy Meadows, and I have a question. I saw you did a short review of this book in the past. He describes getting out of bed, doing things to distract yourself when you can't sleep, as a bad habit that can get your body used to wakefulness at night. This seemed to be the opposite of what you are always saying, so I'm wondering what your thoughts were on this subject. You are awesome. You are awesome, Megan, because these are so great questions. Okay, and let's read this too. So he said, P.S. I'd like to add some personal experience to the question. I tried out his acceptance philosophy last night, and this is how it went. I got in bed at midnight after having been up active since 7 a.m. I laid in bed for an hour, pretty relaxed, listening to a sleep story. At 1 a.m., the anxious thoughts started coming in, and I acknowledged and welcomed them all. At 2 a.m., I was still awake, not particularly anxious, but awake nonetheless. At that point, I was just tired of being awake, so I took an Ambien and was asleep shortly. So from this experience, I think I know where you're going to go with the answer, but I look forward to finding out if I'm right. Okay, so this leads us to kind of two things. First, the original question here, what do you think of Guy Meadows and his thoughts? So with Guy Meadows, like, he's written this book that I have somewhere behind me called, that's right here actually, this one, The Sleep Book by Guy Meadows. So his approach to insomnia is one that's known as acceptance commitment therapy. It's very similar to kind of mindfulness-based therapy for insomnia, or metacognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So the kind of the core of the philosophy is that insomnia is driven by anxiety, by racing thoughts and things of that nature, and that if we can avoid engaging with these feelings, emotions, and thoughts, then they're no longer a problem, and we can sleep. So if for those of you who are kind of like follow my channel, I love this gas and brake analogy. The gas is kind of like our sleep drive, which you talked about before, like the body's need to sleep, and the brake is like the anxiety, the preoccupation, excitement, etc. And I feel like mostly with insomnia, it is true, it's a brake problem often, like we have too much anxiety, but sometimes it's a gas problem too. We don't have enough sleep drive. And I feel like for most people, it's really much easier to work on that gas, spend less time in bed, get up early, etc. So you have more gas when you go to bed. And ACT is like all about the brake. It's all about the brake, which is kind of problematic if you have somebody that spends like 9 hours in bed. Then no matter how little anxiety or how little brake you have, you're still not going to sleep because you don't have the gas going on, right? So that's the problem, I think, with ACT. But if somebody has insomnia that's really driven by anxiety, by stressful thoughts, etc., it could work great. And just for those of you not familiar, it kind of goes something like Megan described. Like if your thought pops up in your head, like, oh my gosh, I can't sleep. Then you go, instead of being like, why can't I sleep? What should I do, etc., you go like, oh, I've had that thought before, and kind of look at the thought from the outside and don't engage with it, which I think can work, but it is hard. Like, it's really a skill. So with that said, going to the specific question here, Guy Meadows feels like if you are in bed and you can't sleep, then just stay there and just like play with your thoughts, like welcome your thoughts, like things like that. And I think that can work, but it's difficult. And his concern, and so what I think, my kind of standard thing to say is that you can think of something pleasant if that comes easy to you, stay in bed. If not, then distract yourself, like read a book or leave. You can read a book in bed, as long as, like, my thing is like, you don't want to be frustrated or angry at night, especially not in bed, because then you associate the bed with kind of frustration. And I want to say that my take is that if you leave the bed, then it is possible that you can become more alert, and it's possible that you could, get a little bit less sleep than you would if you had stayed. But that's still a good thing, because the problem is not that you're losing sleep. The problem is the fear of losing sleep. And by staying in bed, trying to maximize sleep, then you're not willing to have insomnia. You're afraid of losing sleep. You will never get past that. You have to get to a point where you're kind of like, accepting that you may sleep less than, that you may lose some sleep. That's because then you fear that less. Then you sleep a little less, but you still do okay, and the fear of losing sleep comes down, and you sleep good. So so I don't think there's. I think his strategy may work sometimes, but I think a better strategy, I think, is to try to just avoid frustration in bed. And I think getting up is better than just kind of staying and kind of trying to sleep more. And then finally here, I was tired of being awake, so I took an Ambien. I was asleep shortly. That's exactly kind of what we talked about before, and what Nick Wignall talked about, how like in the short run, like that very night, you took an Ambien, that kind of work on the break, that takes away the break, lets your body sleep, and it may feel really good that particular night. But then again, you're kind of training yourself that insomnia is bad. You should avoid insomnia, and you kind of over the course of time, you could become more afraid of insomnia. You don't give yourself the opportunity to like prove to yourself that you can sleep, and you kind of erode your sleep confidence, which is so important. So so yes, Megan, stay in touch. That was a great set of questions. Now, over to an email from Lena. So she writes the following: Dear Dan, I have a couple of questions, and I hope you don't mind answering them at some point. But before I ask any, I really want to thank you for making such positive, informative videos. I had a very bad night when I stumbled upon your channel, and it gave me so much hope and changed my perspective on insomnia. Thank you for the encouragement, and thank you for sending me questions. My sleep problems started a couple of months ago when I got obsessed with how much I slept. Me and my husband live in a tiny studio and work different shifts. He'd always come home around 12 when I'm about to go to bed and start cooking for himself around 1 or 2 a.m. And it drove me crazy because I kept waking up from all the noise and smell. So one day I was trying to fall asleep after my husband was already done with all the cooking and stuff. Suddenly I was aware of falling asleep, and my brain was like, finally, I'm about to drift off. And that woke me up right away. I felt this sudden hot flush, burst of irritation, frustration, and of course fear of not falling asleep. I stayed up the whole night and felt terrible after. And I was so confused and terrified of the idea of not sleeping and being so exhausted. I did not sleep a night after again. These 2 sleepless nights rocked my world. And that's how my insomnia started. Of course, on a 3rd night, I finally fell asleep. Didn't remember how, but it calmed me down. But guess what? I did not sleep a night after. Eventually, I decided to keep myself distracted in bed and watch a show. I guess it helped me, and I slept fine for a couple of weeks. But then one bad night caused another bad night and obsessive thoughts about getting sick, not being able to function, etc. My husband doesn't cook or make loud noises anymore. I feel bad for being a bitch to him, but did my insomnia go away? No. After talking to a psychologist, I managed to convince myself that insomnia won't kill me. And if I'm having bad nights, they are not going to damage my organs or cause mental illness. But what I really don't understand is how to manage to pass through sleep awareness that starts this vicious cycle of anxiety. Last night, I was in bed for 3 hours trying to breathe, relax, and nothing really worked until I passed out a couple hours before my alarm went off. I think that's the main problem of sleeplessness I have. Of course, I think I'm hyper-aroused and anxious about my sleep during my days at work. Of course, I Googled every possible explanation about my insomnia, including sporadic fatal insomnia. That gave me a panic attack, and for a couple of days, I thought I'm really dying. But to be realistic, if I wasn't so anxious about insomnia, none of it would have happened. I watched your video where you discussed Alex's question about how to manage sleep awareness, but I'm not quite sure how you let it pass if it keeps happening again and again for several hours while I'm trying to fall asleep. I will admit that at some point I was so tired and exhausted last night, I started driving me crazy, and I became hopeless and frustrated. I even have a feeling that now that I know that it's the sleep awareness that keeps me awake, it became more of a deal to me than it was before. The funny thing is I always had sleep awareness before sleep even became a problem, and never freaked out about it before. But what happened now? Do you think it's general worry and hyperarousal which causes such distress? I hope my question makes sense because I'm not quite sure how to describe everything. LOL. Another question is, do you think it might be lack of vitamins in my system that make this sleep transition from sleep awareness to sleep harder than it was before? Someone suggested I should take some magnesium to see if it helps. What do you think about that? My doctor put me on trazodone, but I've not tried it yet since I'm trying to cope with it on my own. I'm going to have my physical on Tuesday, though, to see if there's something else that triggers my insomnia and anxiety. I apologize for writing such a long letter. And if you have time to make a response with an email, would just be grateful. And if there's any charge for answer, no, of course not. Thank you. No, thank you, Lena, for sharing all this. And there's a lot to talk about. But to be honest with you, I think this is probably not going to be a very, very long reply here. Firstly, I want to say I think something that is always helpful is to look at something called the 3P model. There are 3Ps involved, and this explains kind of how insomnia develops. So the first one is like predisposition. People that are have a tendency to worry, to the people that are health conscious, people that are kind of overthinkers, people that are type A, kind of perfectionist, almost like that, have more of a risk of getting insomnia. But that's not a problem in itself. Those traits mean nothing. A lot of people have those traits and sleep great, but they are, again, predisposing. The second P is a precipitating factor, which can be anything. It could be like sounds or noise, or it could be some kind of stress that kind of triggers initial sleeplessness. And in this story, we have that precipitating event, those kind of like 2 nights of no sleep. That is the precipitating event. And then comes the most important P, which is the perpetuating factors, which is when somebody identifies this, like, I have insomnia, I'm sleeping very little, this is a problem. What happens is that your brain is identifying sleeplessness as a threat. And that's when you go into the direction of like trying to find out why it is. Like, why do I have insomnia? What's causing it? So what's driving it? Do I have a vitamin deficiency? Is it magnesium? Is it hyperarousal? What the heck is going on? And then also in the direction of like, I have to do something about it. I'm going to ask my husband to be quiet. I'm going to go earlier to bed. I'm going to do all these things. And what's happening is that insomnia is driven by attention. It's like it's oxygen. It cannot survive without it. And when we try to figure out what's happening, try to do things about it, then we actually produce more insomnia because we pay more attention to it. Then we have more trouble sleeping. Then we kind of try more things, try to figure out more. And then we sleep even worse. And that's kind of like chronic insomnia. Now we have chronic insomnia. So the key to this is kind of like to scale back on everything, to go in a direction of like, I'm not going to try to figure out what's going on. It's insomnia. It's like the plain old insomnia that everybody has. That's it. I'm not going to try to figure out what it is. I'm not going to try to do things to fix it. I'm not going to try to keep it dark. I'm just going to spend less time in bed and try to be active during the day. And we'll get back to that in a second, more practical things here. But that's kind of like important to know how insomnia happens. And I'm super happy that your psychologist told you that insomnia is actually not harmful. That is super good. There was something else that I was, overall, like there's a lot of LOL kind of smileys in this email that always makes me really encouraged. Do you think general worry and hyperarousal can cause such distress? Worry and hyperarousal can cause tons of things. It can cause so much distress and so many questions, so many things. And do you think it's the lack of vitamins? That is like a very, very common thing. And then I feel like the other question here was like, or kind of like the final thing to say here really is, there was another question about like, if you have the sleep awareness over and over again, what should you do about that? Well, I want to say when it comes to insomnia, it's like, what should one do? I feel like it's always the same thing. It's always set it and forget it. It's always like, pick a time in the morning when you're going to get up, no matter what. No matter how little you slept, you're going to get up. Decide to go to bed maybe 6 hours before that, maybe 6.5, something like that. So decide that, I'm going to get up at 6. I'm not going to go to bed before 11:30, and just stick to that. That's the set it. And the other one is forget it. That is the like, I'm not going to research. I'm not going to try things. I'm just going to enjoy. I'm just going to go out there and have fun and do things like I always did and not think about sleep. That will help with everything because you will increase your gas. You'll be more sleepy when you go to bed. And even if you have a sudden awareness, then you'll fall back asleep and then you'll have less of them. And that reverses the whole thing. When you start seeing that I can sleep, there's nothing wrong with me. I can fall back asleep, etc. That builds your sleep confidence, and then everything gets better. So I want to say, like in kind of conclusion here, what we read here, Lena, very, very common, kind of classical email, and and I hope this reply helped. And just stay in touch and let us know how things go. All right, and then we come to our last email. We have a couple of comments to go over, but this is the last email. This is from Cara from 2 days ago. Hi there. Recently found your podcast, and I appreciate how willing you are to offer your expertise and wisdom. Anytime. I'm super happy you sent this question. Here's my situation. I started experiencing insomnia at the beginning of December 2019 after never having sleep issues in my life. I found out about CBTi at the beginning of January, and I immediately started implementing sleep restriction and stimulus control on my own. A couple of weeks later, I started working with a sleep therapist. So I've been doing some version of sleep restriction for about 6 weeks. Officially, I'm in week 4 with my therapist. The thing is, week 3 and 4 sleep logs look exactly like week 1. Week 2 was really bad. I was averaging 2.5 hours of sleep. I don't really feel like things are improving. Is this normal? I want to remain hopeful that things can get better, but it's hard to do when I look at my sleep logs. Any advice? Okay, a couple of things. Firstly, I think something that is kind of very much in your favor, Cara, is that you've only, I know it's been several months, but it's quote unquote only been December, January, February. And before that, you never had any sleep issues, which we know that's such proof that there's nothing wrong with you. You have slept fantastic before. You're the same person, the same brain, the same planet, the same air, everything's the same. There's no reason to believe that you can't sleep just as good again. It's just what we talked about with the previous person who emailed us, that beliefs happen, habits, we start paying attention to sleep, we start worrying about sleep, we start thinking about sleep, and we get into this like chronic insomnia spiral, and that can be unwound, definitely can be unwound with CBTi. And it can take time. It can take a lot of time. But there's never, ever a point where like things are hopeless. Like CBTi, in my opinion, is just like weight loss. Like diet and exercise works. It definitely works. There's no question that it works, but it can take a lot of time. And I think the most the most important thing I felt here was this, that you may have come across this term called a sleep effort. A sleep effort is anything we do to try to produce sleep. And that can be like taking melatonin, avoiding coffee, keeping it dark. Those things are things done to like try to get more sleep. And what happens is that whenever you do something and you're hoping that it will make you sleep, then you start monitoring. Then you're like, I took some melatonin. Is it going to be enough? Maybe I shouldn't have taken it. Maybe I should take it more. I wonder if it's going to work. That causes insomnia. So whenever we do something to try to sleep, that leads to us kind of monitoring how much it works, and that creates more attention to insomnia and more sleeplessness. And here's the thing: CBTi can become a sleep effort. If we are going into CBTi or spending less time in bed, and then kind of wondering, when is it going to work? When am I going to sleep more? When is it going to kick in? I've done this 3 weeks. It's not working. I went in 4 weeks for it. It's not working. It's still not working. Then CBTi has become a sleep effort. It is like the more we want to sleep, the less we get. The more we try and sleep, the less we get. The more we're hoping and thinking and pursuing sleep, the less we get. So I think that's why set it and forget it is so important. Like set those sleep times, and then try not to, if you can get to a point where you don't wonder how long it's going to take, that's when the magic starts to happen. When you're no longer like monitoring, where you're no longer kind of keeping track of thinking about it, that's when the magic happens. And so I think that is the most important thing I have to say here. And it can't, like we've seen many times, I have clients or patients really in clinic that it has taken like 2 months, 3 months, but the most important thing here, I've never ever come across somebody who just kept going, kept coming back, kept trying, kept educating themselves, and didn't do better. Like everyone who didn't give up does better. That is my experience, 100%. So Cara, thank you so much. Hang in there. And with that said, let us move over to the comment section. And I think there are actually two comments that I want to really spend some time on. And this first one is from this is a comment on like Insomnia Insight number 2293, and it's from CBTi, and she said the following: "Hi Dan, I implemented CBTi 5 weeks ago, and the first 3-4 weeks were a success. My sleep efficiency improved steadily. I felt much better, and the best of all, because I woke up early every day, I finally had time for working out. The problem is that because of this success, I started treating my sleep as yet another project. I obsessively fill out my sleep diary, count my weekly sleep efficiency, etc. As a result, for the last week or so, there hasn't been any progress, and some of my initial problems, such as hypnic jerks, returned several times. I still average almost 6.5 hours of sleep as opposed to 3 to 4 a few weeks ago, but I haven't been able to reach my goal, which is 7.5. I know that I need to give myself time, as it's still very early, and that setbacks are normal, but I have a feeling that my attitude needs to be modified. I'm thinking of discontinuing my sleep diary and trying to stop thinking about sleep altogether. As hard as it is there anything else I can do? I wake up consistently at 6 a.m. My sleep window is 10:30 to 6, and I do stimulus control. Thank you for your help. Your videos are amazing." I want to say this, that first of all, these like 3-4 weeks were a success. That is amazing. Like, I'm so glad you mentioned it. The fact that you mentioned it is really good. That's kind of affirming that you had success. I want to spend like 20 minutes just talking about that because it's so important to focus on the positives, that builds kind of like momentum and confidence. That's really, really good. Now, the second thing I want to say here is that I think this is a huge amount of insight here, that obsessing about sleep definitely can be a reason why there's not not much more progress here. Absolutely, and as part of that is like, I feel like the goal is very important. Like, if somebody has the goal of sleeping like 7.5 hours, that will always lead to self-monitoring, meaning checking how close to that am I? Am I getting to 7? Am I 7.5? What should I do to get 7.5? How can I do that? I think a much better goal is like, be happy. Like, I wanna not worry about my sleep. I wanna feel good during the day, and be happy. That's it. And when that becomes the goal, much more subjective, not objective. Like, when you have a subjective goal, just feeling good, being happy, not worried, that leads away from monitoring. That leads away from obsessing. Leads away from kind of checking. So I think a great strategy is, I know I say this all the time, set it and forget it. Yeah, pick a sleep window, 10:30 to 6, and then that's it. You try to just do things during the day that keeps you preoccupied, that keeps you happy, etc. I think that's amazing. I think that's an amazing strategy. But yeah, overall, like, I think you have so much insight that that's in itself is great. And with that said, we have Rafael Cardona replied, made a comment here on Insomnia Insight number, or actually cognitive behavioral therapy for Insomnia, the deep dive, and I was wondering if, like, can CBTi work for like somnophobia, fear of falling asleep? And I asked for what's going on, like some more detail there, and then Rafael shared with us a story about how basically 7 to 8 years ago he had a disagreement with a neighbor. That neighbor became very angry, and eventually that became I think this somehow that kind of triggered worrying about sleep, and to think about the control over sleep, and got chronic insomnia, etc. So what I just wanted to say here, Rafael, was that when I read more of the story here, it became pretty clear to me that it sounds like that this sounds like classical insomnia. So with all having read that, I felt like yeah, whenever anyone has trouble sleeping, insomnia, the best thing is always CBTi. It's definitely always CBTi. So I just want to say that I definitely think, having read that, I think CBTi could really, really, really work well for you. And with that said, I feel like to just add one thing, which is something I say often, but there was somebody who wrote an email that she was trying to kind of meditate or do things to become more calm, which I want to say that never works. Whenever you do something with a direct attempt of making yourself calm, that kind of just puts that directs attention to your anxiety. So the best thing to do is like do things you enjoy. If you like meditation, yoga, because of in itself, perfect. If you don't, then don't do anything with the purpose of making yourself calmer. Just do things that you enjoy, and then as an indirect effect of that, your hyperarousal decreases. So with that said, thanks so much, everybody, for all the questions. So grateful for that, and I will be back with a special episode tomorrow on why a setback is really, really important on the path to sleeping great forever. That said, hope you have a good night, and I'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.